It's great to see you all again, and the logo there is a logo that I came up with when I first joined Dyalog back in 2011, and was asked to head up the APL tools group. And the P and the L were easy to find, but finding a tool that's in the shape of an A was a bit of a challenge. So, but this is the APL tools update. I'm going to talk a little bit about what our future plans are, a little bit about how we develop tools, and then I'm going to show you a few of our tools. So an APL tool, at least I consider it's a software component that you can embed in your APL application, or you can use it to develop an APL application. And it's generally written in APL, but not always, right? And it's not an application in and of itself. So at Dyalog, we have, if you have Dyalog for Windows installed, it comes with over 60 workspaces. And some of those are core utilities, some are tutorials, some are games, some are demonstrations. We have a number of built-in tools that are built into the session, and they can be included as user commands or bracket loadable. Bracket load is a user command that allows you to bring stuff into your workspace. We also have, the Dyalog repository has about 59 public, or the Dyalog GitHub account has about 59 public repositories, and roughly 20 or so of those are some form of tool or another. They also, other repositories include like my sandbox, where I do interesting things, and Morton has a sandbox. And then we have 2 Teton packages so far, and Morton's been talking about APL packages and Teton, so currently we have 2. And just to go over some of the categories of tools, we have some web enabling tools. There's Jarvis, which Morton's mentioned a few times, and a couple of people will be speaking about later today. We have HttpCommand. We've got Dewey, MyServer, which are basically the same thing. Dewey is the next generation of MyServer, so it's a web server and content creation library. We have Saws, which was the original project that I worked on when I started working with Dyalog, which is it was also a web service framework that uses a SOAP and XML. And I actually gave a talk at APL 2010 in Berlin on Saws. We also have a lot of tools to manipulate data. There's load data to read and write Excel, CSV, and XML files. We have NewLeaf. Not too many people know about NewLeaf, but you can produce really fine PostScript documents for publication with NewLeaf. SharpPlot can produce pretty much any kind of graph you can imagine. And we also have in the a math repository that has some math capabilities that I don't understand. So then we have a number of tools to interface with the rest of the world. Conga is our TCP/IP toolkit. We've got an interface to to SQL databases via ODBC. APL service allows you to run your APL application as a Windows service. We also have APL process, which allows you to spawn another process with an interpreter. We have isolates, which allows you to do parallel execution. Actually, isolate uses APL process. And then we've got the Python APL interface, Pineapple. So, and then we've also got Dewey, which you saw on the previous screen, but it uses HTML renderer underneath, so you can do cross-platform user interfaces. So, and then we have a number of development and deployment aids that includes Link, which now with basically the early versions of Link I didn't use very much, but now it's a part of my daily development. It's a terrific way to manage code in your workspace and keep it in sync with code on file. There's this dbuild test, which is a framework that we use to build workspaces and test applications. Cider, which Morton has mentioned for project management, and Teton for package management. When we talk about where tools are available, to the extent that's possible and wherever it makes sense, We support the latest 3 releases of Dyalog APL plus any future releases. So right now that means 17.1 up through release 20 or version 20. We also try and support it on every platform that we deliver on. So there are 5 platforms there. And then we also want to support Classic and Unicode, again, to the extent that's possible, and 32 and 64-bit on those platforms where we have both of those. So, and in addition to that, we also have, running the code in Docker containers, running it headless, running it in a scripted form. And so if you do the outer product of all of these things, it's not a completely filled space, but it's probably about 70 different environments that we'd like our tools to run in. So goals for 2024. Well, first of all, work with you guys, our customers, to identify tools that will help you succeed in doing what you do. We want to make it easier to find out what tools are available. And so that's through the website, through blogs, through the Dyalog forums online. We want to make tools easier to learn, which means writing documentation and then doing tutorial webcasts, providing sample applications, and providing other tutorials. And we want to perform more comprehensive testing. If we're trying to deliver a tool that's supposed to run under 70 some odd environments, it may be difficult to test under all 70 of those. We'd never, so we're working on that though. So we want to have broader test suites. And then something that Michael Boss has been working on is this thing called CETA, which is continuous integration testing in APL. And if we get it to work the way it's intended, it will run your test suite under as many of those configurations as possible, and then give you a report back about where it succeeded or failed. So specific goals for 2024, well, how many people are using HttpCommand? Wow, okay, good. So mostly HttpCommand is functionally complete, but I keep adding new things based on feedback from users, or if I have a clever idea. But we also want to produce some webcasts. The documentation is quite complete at this point, and I'll show you that in a moment. But I want to do some webcasts and tutorials to show people more about how to use it. How many people are using Jarvis? Okay, another good number. So I want to harden Jarvis a little bit, make it a little more industrial. It seems to be pretty reliable as it is, but there isn't a lot of capability yet for doing like remote administration or doing request logging and things like that. The user can add those things, but I'd like to build them into Jarvis. And then I want to finish the documentation and again do tutorials and webcasts to show you more about how to use it. WebSocket server, this is something new that I've been working on and hope to release next year. The first thing I want to do is come up with a better name. And so if anybody has an idea of a better name for a WebSocket server, please suggest it. And then also I want to do document APL process and publish a proper release in its own GitHub repository. And then packages, yes, we're going to publish more Dyalog packages on Tatan. And Morton said yesterday that if there were still only 2 at next year's conference, he was going to retire. Well, you don't get off that easily, Morton, so. So let's talk a little bit about HttpCommand. It's designed with APLers in mind to issue an HTTP request and return the response from the host in a manner that's useful to the APLer. And you can use it for interacting with web services, downloading files from the web, scraping web pages, and probably some other things that I haven't thought of. Basically any HTTP interaction, right? And we'll go into the demo. Will this actually work? No, you can't copy from the... Is the font size okay? Yes. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, HTTP command ships with Dyalog, and so you can load it, and it will load into your workspace. But the next thing I'd like to do generally is an upgrade, because the version that's in your Dyalog installation is what was released when that installation was built, and there may be newer releases. And so if you do an HTTP command .upgrade, so let's try that again. There we go. So HTTP command actually uses HTTP command to go out and grab the latest release from GitHub and download it. And now this is a really nice feature, especially when you're playing in the session. Don't put HTTP command .upgrade in your code, because if we do a major version bump, which makes it, which is a breaking change from the previous major version, and you do an HTTP command .upgrade in your code, well, you get what you could get what you don't want. So here I'm going to define some parameters, right? And ooh, where'd my URL go? Okay. So I'm going to define a URL, which is talking to the GitHub API, and I'm defining some parameters. So I'm basically looking at the Dyalog repositories on GitHub, and I'm saying I want to get 5 returned, and I want to get the ones that have been most recently pushed, right? And so then, whoa, hello. What is? This is why I don't use bracket demo. Okay, there we go. So I've got my URL and my parameters, and now I'm going to call a command called get.json, which expects to, if it has a payload, it's going to send it in JSON format, and it's going to expect the response in JSON, and then it's going to run it through quad JSON automatically and return an APL array as its result. So there's a few things you can see here. One is the return code is 0, which means nothing, HTTP command didn't fail. There's no message. If the return code was non-zero, it would normally give you some sort of message as to what went wrong. The HTTP status is what the server sent back that says that the response was okay. A 200 series response is good. And then you see that the tally of data is 5. And so I don't know why. Okay, so now the R is a namespace, which is returned, and it has a bunch of information, but one of the components in R is the data that was sent back from the server. So we can see here that, well, no surprise, since I had a workshop on Sunday, there were recent changes to HTTP command in Jarvis, and Michael's been working furiously on CETA, and Morton's been working furiously on Link. So these are the 5 most recently updated repositories in our GitHub. And so now the data, so this is I'm using HTTP command to get the homepage at dyalog.com. And I'm pulling out the data element and assigning that to the HTML setting for an HTML renderer. So now I should be able to bring up the Dyalog web page locally in an HTML renderer. Okay, I think that's it. So on Sunday, Adam and I torpedoed each other's workshops because it turns out we both had samples that were going against the GitHub repository, their API, And when you do unauthenticated queries, you're rate limited to 60 an hour. And so I was only going to do a few, and by the time I got to my third one, it said rate limit exceeded. Little did I know that Adam, in his workshop, was also hitting against the API, and so this was a backup just in case somebody else was doing something with the GitHub API. So Jarvis, so a few years ago, a customer wanted to make their APL functions available to other groups within the company and other non-APL APL parts of the company. And as often happens, Morton had an idea on how to address their need, and then he asked me to make it happen. And so over a weekend, I wrote this thing called JSON server, and it seemed to be well received. Then sometime later, another customer wanted a capability to deliver a RESTful web service using JSON server. So I could no longer call it JSON server because it was not just JSON. So JSON server became JSON and REST service, or Jarvis. So it's a framework that makes it easy to expose your APL functionality as a web service. And how easy? Well, let's see if this demo works. Clear. Nothing up my sleeve. Okay, so here I'm actually going to load, it's not included with your Dyalog installation, so I'm just going to load it from my local copy of the GitHub repository. And I'm going to define some endpoints. This is going to be my application, and it's going to be really complicated. There we go. So these are 3 endpoints now: sum, rotate, and high. Nope. And now I'm going to start a Jarvis, I'm going to define a Jarvis service to run on port 8080, and then I'm going to start it. And so it gives us some information here. But if I click on this URL, I come up to a built-in web page that I created so you could test your endpoints. And you can see we've got a drop-down of endpoints, and Jarvis recognized the functions in the root namespace as potential endpoints. So we've got high, rotate, and sum. And so if I give it a numeric array in JSON format, right? And I don't call high on that, I call sum on that, I get the expected result. And if I call rotate on it, I get the array back. And we can also pass objects, right? So if I pass an object with an element in it called name, right? So that's basically the equivalent of an APL namespace with an element called name in it. And I now click, I run the high endpoint. It says, welcome to Jarvis world, Brian. So you could see from when we defined our endpoint, so what Jarvis does is it takes the payload that you send and it converts it to an APL array and passes that as your left argument to an APL function. Your APL function returns an array, and we convert that back into Jarvis, or Jarvis converts it back into JSON and sends it back to the client. So you don't have to think about any of that conversion. Jarvis does it for you. As long as you can write a monadic result returning function, you can deliver it as a web service. And now if I bring in HTTP command and now I use HTTP command as my client to Jarvis. Here I'm going to call the sum endpoint, right? So I'm saying call the sum endpoint and give it IO to 100. And then if I look at r.data, it's 50-50. Right? Does everybody get that? Is that easy? Okay.
I get that it works. I don't get what it does for you.
Well, okay, so if you have functions that return results, right?
I do.
You do, okay. And if I'm on the other side of the country and you want to make that available to me, you can bring up a web service locally, and I can use a browser or whatever to communicate to your web service to run your functions and get data. You don't have to send me any software.
So it's useful for collaboration.
It can be useful for collaboration. It could be, it basically allows you to deliver your APL functionality to people who may not be running APL. Right, so. Okay, so demo time. Now suppose you have a web application that's got an HTML client. And if you issue standard HTTP requests, the only way to get updated information is to ask for it. So wouldn't it be nice if you could push, if the server could push updated information in real time without the client having to ask for it? Well, WebSockets can do that and more. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek at WebSocket server. It's a WebSocket server. What's a WebSocket? I'd like to tell you, but I'm running out of time. So it basically allows you to have bidirectional communication between your client, the browser or whatever, and the server. So there are a number of different things that you can do with it, but what I'll do is I will just demonstrate it. Unload that demo, clear demo /. Okay, so here I'm going to import some code from my WebSocket server directory. And I'm going to define a new WebSocket server. And then I'm going to start it. And then I'm just going to open an HTML file in the browser. And so this is just the browser opening a local file, right? But if I have three duck users, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and if I log in, first of all, it's going to show me their portfolio. So they've got a number of shares in different commodities or in different stocks. And you'll see that it says Huey just logged in. Now you also notice that Apple's price just changed, right? So there's a ticker web service running to update stock prices as they come in. And then it should dynamically update if you happen to own one of the stocks that's just changed, it will update your portfolio on the fly. So if you want to provide real-time information back to the client without them having to ask for it, WebSockets is the way to go. And since I'm running out of time, I just want to mention that there are several other sources of good quality APL tools. Adam has got a number of repositories on his GitHub account that has got some absolutely fantastic stuff. Kai Yeager, who spoke yesterday, has got dozens of high quality tools. I started using those when I first started using Dyalog, and when I first met him at Dyalog 2009, I thanked him profusely because he gave me a real leg up on using Dyalog. There's Tatam, which we've mentioned, which is the APL package repository. And while Kai is the primary contributor to that, if the community could also push their tools out to it, that would be terrific. The Carlisle group has also got some really good utilities. And so in summary, our customers are our partners, and we're in this together. And so if you have a need, tell us. I mean, the reason Jarvis exists today is because a user communicated a need to Morton, And so many of the features in our tools are in direct response to feedback we've had. And so please report bugs, suggest features, and if you care to, contribute code. Especially on the repositories that are based on GitHub, you can issue what are known as pull requests. So you can say, hey, this would be a neat feature to add to Jarvis, submit a pull request, or submit an issue to request an enhancement, and we will take a look at it and see what we can do to accommodate that. And that's it. Oh, 0, I made it. Thank you.